Welcome in to Carp's Corners. We sit here and dive deeper into some more NFL stuff that's going on. Man, there is a lot of news. And after the Super Bowl, sit here and we'll look at all the different coaching hirings and break down all of that and to see where those things are ultimately going and predictions for how I think each coach will probably do and what their timeline is for each respective team. But it's Super Bowl week. And so there are some topical stories that need to be addressed and discussed, but we also need to get into the Super Bowl and make sure that we are giving the Cincinnati Bengals and the Los Angeles Rams their due, because that's what it's all about, is making sure that we talk about the actual football that's going on the field. However, there are some other things that are going on, and we'll get into those as well. There's a little Tiki Barber, Stephen A beef, and Stephen A took a low blow, and we'll get into that. Full disclosure, I was a Giants fan growing up, and yeah, that's weird. Played for the Dallas Cowboys. How does that make sense? Well, my dad played there for 5 years, and that was always the team that I kind of associated with him the most, because that's who he was playing with, for the majority of my youth and at the end of his career. So we'll get into that and, knowing some people on the inside and kind of how that organization works and some of the accusations that Stephen A. Smith brought to the table and what Tiki Barber ultimately said. And I'm not here to discredit either one of them. I think one of them shot a low blow, but who I think's opinion on this matters more, simply due to the proximity that they had to the organization. A couple of coaching vacancies were filled, and how good those ultimately are. And take a high level look at some of these jobs and try to figure out exactly, are these jobs really all they're cracked up to be? And as we're talking about the minority hiring process and everything that's going on with that, are these jobs, some of these jobs even very desirable? If you were a black coach getting in, especially a first-time coach, is this a job that you would even want based upon where that it could ultimately be going? Because, you never get a second chance at a first impression. Now, you do get usually second chances in coaching, as long as you don't embarrass yourself and make a fool of the organization. You'll get a second chance a lot of times as a head coach. And so that can happen. But do you really want your first job to be a bad job? Probably not. And so you can be very judicious, especially if you're highly desirable, and figure out exactly what job you want to take. Michigan has a couple of hires to fill out their coordinator spots, diving out of the college side. Kyler Murray, big news out of Arizona, and the former first-round draft pick entering the fourth year of his career, what could be in store for him? And two big interesting points that I see coming out of that, and understanding exactly where the Cardinals could be going, because the Cardinals for a long time were kind of a joke in the NFL. Kurt Warner got them back on the map. They started playing some better football. They got to a Super Bowl. This could be the next iteration of success for them with Kyler Murray, as the early reports on him and returns on him and Cliff Kingsbury look to be looking pretty good. So is there trouble out there in the desert? So trouble in the Valley of the Sun. And then last, I'm going to give you one of my big keys to the Super Bowl. Talked a lot already about the Chiefs or the Rams wide receivers versus a Bengals secondary. It's pretty underrated based upon how they played and who they played towards the end of the season here and what they've been able to do, in a couple of those big games. So we'll take a look at the other big matchup and a key number that I'm going to throw out there, that as you're watching the game, something important to track as you move through it, to understand potentially where this game could be going. So we'll get into all that. Wanted to start though with the New York Giants. One of the most storied franchises in NFL history, 4 Super Bowls, 2 by 2 different coaches. Tom Coughlin, Bill Parcells, had a lot of success. Fassel took them to another. I mean, they've been a good franchise and a good organization. Heck, they took down the Patriots twice with, unbelievable teams, and were able to get those victories in the Super Bowl, unexpected victories, by Eli Manning. Mariners have owned the team for, I believe, since inception. The Tishas got involved, a number of years back, and, those two have kind of shepherded the Giants through a lot of success in, the Big Apple. Not an easy place to play, not an easy place to win, huge media market. And love it or hate it, I mean, New York is a football town. It's a baseball town too. And, the Giants, they're the cream of the crop. They're right up there. New York Yankees. The Knicks have been irrelevant for a long time, but they still get a lot of love. They're in the biggest market in America in the NFL. And because of that, they're going to receive a lot of eyeballs. And so, they went out and you look at their coaching hirings, what they're ultimately doing. Didn't hire a black coach this time around. And Stephen A. Smith brings up the fact that John Mayer is on the diversity committee. They hired Brian Daboll, and everybody knows what kind of happened with him and Brian, the text with him and Brian Flores getting mixed up with Bill Belichick and who they're ultimately going to hire. Did it ultimately, was it a sham interview? Did the Giants even really want to hire Brian Flores? We've kind of talked about that, but the allegations, Stephen A. Smith going off on, John Mara, whose team has owned it, how he's on the diversity committee for the NFL, never had a black head coach, never had a black quarterback, and how that there's like racial undertones that he's was insinuating that happened within the organization. And he's been a reporter. He's been in New York a long time. He has connections inside. Well, Tiki Barber, who played for the Giants for about a decade, took umbrage to that and spouted back at Stephen A. and saying, you don't know what you don't know. I know the marriage. I know the Tishes. They've treated me like family incredibly well over the tenure. Tiki Barber, for the younger folks out there, incredibly talented running back, guy who I watched growing up and they got a chance to play against a couple of times. Really, really talented player. And, missed the Super Bowl with the Giants, but was really the face of that team and the face of that organization for a number of years. Had a lot of success there, and now works in radio and TV in New York, and is still a part of the fabric of that community and the fabric of the franchise. And so when he comes out and said, they treated me like family, they didn't treat me racist, I'm going to have a tendency to believe him. And the fact that they haven't had a black head coach, okay, I get that. Haven't had a black quarterback. All right. Well, you had Eli Manning there for about the last decade and change. You had Phil Simms for a large run in the 90s, kind of spun it through. Okay. Is that something you'd like to change? I don't think there's anything inherent saying we want a white quarterback. I don't think that's what the Giants were trying to do by any stretch. Evaluate players. They bring in the best guys that they see. And with where they pick and where they lined up, they picked Daniel Jones over Dwayne Haskins last year. Dwayne Haskins, who I thought a lot of coming out, he's on his second team with the Steelers, didn't pan out well with the Washington football team at the time, now the Commanders. And if you look at Daniel Jones, yeah, he's struggled, but he hasn't been great either. So I don't know if either one of those guys maybe should have been picked that high. But they also did, and Stephen A. addressed this, they've had a black GM in Jerry Reese, who won 2 Super Bowls, by the way. He also helped hire McAdoo, which ultimately led to his firing, but Jerry Reese was at the helm from 2007 to 2017. What people don't know about this, and this is, unless you're familiar with the New York Giants situation, they've got, I believe, if not the longest, one of the longest tenured head trainers, and he basically runs the entire health side of the Giants organization, football-wise. He reports only to the owners. He has been there 40 years. He has survived numerous coaches and general managers, which doesn't usually happen. But a guy named Ronnie Barnes, who's fantastic, an African-American, a black gentleman, who does an unbelievable job. And you talk to trainers around the NFL, the most respected guy you're going to find. And he was impervious to coaching hirings and firings, GM hirings and firings. And so I think that proves that they're not racist. I don't know how you can prove that outside of talking to these guys and then having players and coaches and people of color who have had conversations with them. And Tiki Barber was part of that organization. And so for him to say that and being inside of it for as long as he has, and my dad being a part of it, looking at it, granted, I'm a white guy. What the heck do I know in this situation? But then watching it, knowing other guys who have played there and who've had unbelievable experiences with the Giants, who really do a great job of taking care of their players and promoting them in the city of New York. But you look at the track record in totality, I wouldn't say that you would be able to find any of those accusations. It's not to say that Stephen A. Smith didn't hear anything, but the biggest issue I had was then in his retort when he responded to Tiki after this. This is the big issue. This is where we have, we're talking sports media here. But Tiki Barber's got some stuff in his personal history. A lot of guys have a lot of baggage, and nobody ever threatens someone with that personal baggage. There's a code. There's an understanding saying, hey, we all know a lot of things. A lot of guys know where skeletons are buried. For other people, people know where they're buried for them. And they're discussed privately, never alluded to openly, never really talked about publicly. And Stephen A. Smith basically threatening Tiki Barber with that and then saying, I would never bring it up. I would never bring out those personal things, but I know a lot on you. I know I got dirt on you. Like that to me is where he crossed the line from personal professionalism to being personal and trying to throw it out there. You like waving the handgun, waving the stick, saying, hey, I can do this. I'm going to choose not to. It's not professional. It's alluding that you could do it, and you're just ultimately not because you feel like you're the better person, grandstanding a little bit. And I respect Stephen A. He's done a great job, but that to me crosses the line. And I think he probably crossed the line in some of his accusations with the New York Giants as well and what he was saying about them. Maybe there have been people that have told him that, but talking with players, doing some research, listening to Tiki Barber, there's none of that I've found. And looking at kind of the history of the New York Giants over the last 30 to 40 years with which I'm familiar with, I haven't seen any of that as well. And so, Stephen A., take a break, take a chill pill. We need to all like dial down the rhetoric a little bit and just have a conversation if you want to talk about this without the accusations. And if you're going to really say it, like put some people's names on it. If they have that big of a problem with it, with people that have been inside the organization, because most of the people that I've talked to that have had experiences with it of all races wouldn't be able to identify any of the things that were being accused. And then don't step over the line at the end. What the personal insults that can be left at the door. So I'll put a bow on that. We're going to put that to the side. And since we're talking about coaches, a couple jobs get filled. Talking about Houston, H-Town, bringing Lovie Smith in, the accusations by Brian Flores' attorneys that, you know what, the only reason he wasn't hired, he was a clear and obvious choice for the job, as opposed to Lovie Smith, who was in-house defensive coordinator, did a great job with the Bears, struggled a little bit with Tampa Bay. They were in kind of a rebuilding process. Imagine that, and they ultimately made some decisions that I didn't agree with at the end of his tenure. But then people look ultimately at what he did in college. And this is the irony of this. And you wait this, it was awesome. I saw a friend of mine put this out on social media. We never penalize Nick Saban as a coach in college for his time in the NFL. So why should we penalize Lovie Smith as an NFL coach for what he did in college? That doesn't make any sense to me. And it was a little aha moment as I saw that and thought about it, like, what the heck are we talking about here? Yeah, he struggled at Illinois, wasn't great. He's a little bit older. Everyone's hiring younger coaches, but that shouldn't exclude him from an opportunity to get the job. And I can't sit here and say that Brian Flores is a clear and obvious better candidate for that position. Lovie Smith's taking a team to a Super Bowl. He has a winning record as a head coach in the NFL. Like, that's pretty darn impressive. And it's really difficult to do. Yeah, it's been a while since he's had that success. And so you can debate about that all you want. But to speak in finalities and certainties, well, I don't think that necessarily that's the way to go. And then another job, the New Orleans Saints, they end up hiring Dennis Allen, in-house guy, very similar defensive coordinator. They give him the job. They've got no quarterback. They're way, way over the cap. And, you wonder, it's kind of maybe possibly a rebuild, or they're going to try to retool, but there could be some pain. But if I was an NFL head coach, aspiring head coach, coordinator, whatever it is, I don't know if I would want either one of those jobs anyway. Houston, yeah, they're going to probably move on from Deshaun Watson. They've got get some assets back, but that's going to be a long-term build. And you look at New Orleans, you've had 20 years of greatness with Drew Brees and Sean Payton. That's a tough act to follow, especially when you're going to be going through cap purgatory and trying to find a way to keep some of these great young players. And, the Alvin Kamara's, who's in his own hot water, by the way, for what happened out in Vegas and the assault that occurred there. He could be missing games, the Marshawn Lattimore's, guys like that. You've got to try to find a way to keep these guys together. Michael Thomas hadn't played in a while. What's the deal with him? He's got the ankle injury. Is that something they're going to want to keep? He's got a big price tag. Do they move on from him? Like, all of these questions, I don't know if there's any great answers for him. And so if you're looking at this, I don't know if those would have been great jobs anyway. And so if you're a minority coach that gets it, I mean, everyone's going to be upset if you get fired in 2 or 3 years. Well, you're probably not going to have much of a chance to win. I don't know if Dennis Allen is going to survive this thing. Maybe they find a way to soft land it, take back off, go 7-10 for 1 year, maybe 8-9, and then ascend back up and finding a quarterback and getting their cap situation structure figured out. But it's not going to be easy. I can promise you that. It's not going to be an easy situation to kind of handle. So does anyone even want either one of those jobs? For me, if it was my first job in the NFL, or maybe even worse, my second chance, if I hadn't had a ton of success the first go around, I don't know if I'd want to touch those. Dennis Allen, it's his second shot. So he's going to have to find a way to make it work. Lovie Smith as well, but he's much further down the line, if you will, in his coaching career than Dennis Allen. Some tough stuff in the desert happening. You look at the Arizona Cardinals and what they've been able to do and building their team with Kyler Murray. I thought it was a big gamble bringing in Cliff Kingsbury, draft Kyler number 1 overall. You move on from quarterback, they move on from Josh Rosen, who you had taken before. They find a way to start building this team, adding some key free agents. Chandler Jones, they brought in a little bit before. JJ Watt, like they've done a good job adding pieces. Hopkins comes in there. They've got all this stuff. And some of these guys obviously had injuries. They're a little older veteran guys, but they make the playoffs and they're playing really good football. But the key piece of that is Kyler Murray and how Cliff Kingsbury's been using them. And so a lot of people have heard, hey, this is what the kids do now. It's a generational thing. I'll use Kyler Murray as a kid because he's significantly younger than me. You scrub if there's any type of dispute, you scrub your organization, a friend, teammate, whatever it is, you scrub them from social media. And people are like, whoa, something's going on. Something's happening here. Let's dig into it a little bit. So Kyler Murray, unfollowed the Cardinals from his social media accounts, removed all the imagery of him with Cardinal stuff on and any promotional stuff that he had with them, as if he had never played for him, and he's not playing for him currently. 2 reasons for this in my mind. One, I think, is a little more likely than the other. The first reason you look at, and obvious, hey, maybe he wants out. You see Russell Wilson trying to do this. You saw Aaron Rodgers trying to maybe work his way out of Green Bay. And they're guys that are really beloved and they're nice dudes. And so they don't want to come out here and overtly just cause a stink and say they want out. Same thing with Tom Brady, what happened in New England. They try to finagle away contractually and make a little bit of waves, but nothing too much. They don't want to come out here and disrupt things on a massive scale, because as a quarterback, that hurts your brand. Other positions, I don't think it's as big a deal, but as a quarterback, if you have to return to the team, it never works out all that well. And so I think Russell's doing this, and maybe Kyler Murray is. Why would he want out? You ask yourself that question. Is it the market? The Cardinals, let's be honest, it's Arizona, Phoenix. It's kind of a transient place, a lot of move-ins. They don't really have the largest following in the world. But I will say this, with Kurt Warner and what they were building there, have done some things. It takes a generation to raise fans and a generation of success. Cardinals have started to have that. You've got a young coach, an exciting offense. I think you're going to see more Cardinals fans in the future. They've got a great stadium. Now it's out Glendale. It's a little bit removed from downtown. But they still have a pretty good setup, and they've been having success. So as you win, you will continue to grow and develop that fan base. As the city grows and there's more people indigenous, meaning to me being born there, native to the region and not just moved in, yeah, I think you're going to have that as well. And you're going to see the growth of a fan base if you keep having success. But, it's not New York. It's not a diehard fan base, like you're going to find in Green Bay, but not that Kyler would want to go there. It's not Atlanta. It's not the size of Houston. And so maybe he wants out market size. Another thing it could be, is it the offense? Is it the coach? Well, that doesn't make any sense to me at all. Offense fits what he does pretty darn well. Cliff Kingsbury understands what Kyler does as well as anybody. He's built it kind of like a collegiate style offense. They've started leaning on the run, running the football a little bit more, taking some heat off of him, and he allows it to open up. It's not like it's an incredibly restrictive offense. This isn't the same of what's going on in Seattle where, hey, Pete Carroll wants to run the ball. Russell Wilson wants to throw it. I don't see any of that friction going on right there. The last piece, could it be the organization? Could he want out because of the team? Is there something structurally that he doesn't like? The Bidwells, historically haven't been one that have spent a lot. However, they've started to ratchet up, bringing in free agents. Look what they did. They brought in J.J. Watt, brought in Nuke Hopkins. I mean, they've brought in some big time players. They've tried to add pieces around and tried to go and have some success and win. So a lot of those things don't really line up. It's a pretty good market. They're starting to grow. It's a nice place to live. You've got an offense that fits you well. The team is starting to invest and spend, and it's not like they're not trying to win. So the only other logical thing it could be, other than him wanting out, is the desire for a new contract. Kyler's going into his fourth season. He's got his fifth-year option coming up, $25 million on the 5-year option. And the Bidwells, like I said, they've started to invest more into the team, but people still kind of look at them as being historically cheap. And maybe there's this rub. Maybe he wants to reset the quarterback market. And if he has another good year, I would say that could be the case. Maybe he's trying to get this deal done now. Maybe he wants this Pat Mahomes style deal that's going to lock him in and reset the market and ring in about $500 million. That could be the case. And maybe those negotiations aren't going anywhere. Maybe his representation has brought it up and they say, hey, we're going to address this at the end of the season. That could be the case. That sounds like the most viable option to me, the most logical option to me as you sit there and analyze this. I don't think that he really wants out. I think that he wants a new deal. And it sounds like instead of coming out and clamoring, say, hey, we've tried to discuss it. Cardinals are miles apart from us, or they want to table it and talk about it later. Instead of doing that, because Kyler doesn't really strike you as the most controversial guy you're going to find. Hey, I'm going to do what the younger folks do now. I'm going to unfollow you on social media. I'm going to scrub my pages and my accounts from all of our associations and to send, a veiled shot that way. And maybe that'll spur on some of these conversations. Because here's the deal. You want to hit organizations where it hurts? Well, you hit them in the pocketbook. And if they're selling sponsorships coming up, suites and everything, and there's a thought that Kyler Murray might not be there, well, hey, that might change the consumer investment into the Arizona Cardinals. And people might be holding off on buying those suite package, buying those season tickets, buying those sponsorships that they think, hey, we're going to have Kyler Murray running around to 11, 12 win seasons, chance to win the NFC West and be relevant and viable and all these things. Exciting product out there, something that people want to be associated with. Well, if you remove Kyler Murray, poof, all those things disappear. And so this is smart. He's getting ahead of it early on, if that's ultimately what it is, because there hasn't really been a lot of news coming out of his camp. Larry Fitzgerald was asked about it, over the weekend, earlier this week. And he's like, hey, I just want to see this thing all get worked out. Maybe it's contractual. That's kind of what he alluded to. And I always kind of lean on players who would be knowledgeable about this. But Larry is closely tied to the organization, loves Kyler, doesn't want to throw anyone under the bus. So when he's like, maybe it's a little this, a little that, read between the lines and you can figure it out. Larry Fitzgerald's a smart guy. He's going to leave you some breadcrumbs like Hansel and Gretel. You just got to figure it out on your own and identify what they are. So I'm tending to believe that it is this contract situation, that he's wanting something long-term, and maybe, just maybe, there's a little foot dragging going on by the Arizona Cardinals. Before we get to the keys, the last key that I have to the Super Bowl, something that you want to watch and pay attention to. Michigan lost McDonald, lost Josh Gaddis, defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, been there for a couple years. McDonald been there for one. He's out, going back to Baltimore. Gaddis goes down to the Miami Hurricanes, as we've talked about. So who do they replace him with? It's February. You got to replace 2 coordinators for Jim Harbaugh. Goes internal for one position, kind of by committee, goes external for the other. Defensive coordinator first. And this is going to be the biggest piece of it. And this is amazing, the ties that Jim Harbaugh keeps going back to. All the stuff and all the guys that he gets that have ultimately had some success. As you see McDonald going back to Baltimore, where his brother coaches, where they ran a very specific type of defense. To replace him, goes to Vanderbilt, brings in Jesse Minter. Jesse Minter, his dad was on the coach for the Ravens. He's experienced, runs that same type of system. And it's important. You want to have continuity with what you're doing and have guys who are speaking the same language. It's easier for your young players to pick up. So he brings in Jesse Minter from Vanderbilt. His dad, Rick, he said, coach with the Ravens, was the head coach at the University of Cincinnati for a number of years. He's bounced around, really good coach. Jesse, I think, is a good coach. However, Vanderbilt, not known to be a football hotbed, if you will. They've had some success, but not a ton. Their defense was ranked in the hundreds last year. And so you're going from a guy who got this thing all fixed up, who was coming from the NFL. You've lost your two best pass rushers in Ajabo and Hutchinson. Got to replace those two that are disruptors. And you're bringing in Jesse Minter, who's around my age, 37, 38 years old. And ultimately, he was on a defense last year at Vanderbilt that was in the hundreds. Not really a step up, in my opinion, going for this. Now, maybe Minter can come out and have success. I don't know if he'll be as good in his first year just due to the personnel, but maybe he'll surprise everyone. But it's not that splash hire that I think you're looking for if you're the Wolverines. Then we look to the offensive side of the ball. Said Josh Gaddis bolts, heads out of there, trying to modernize Jim Harbaugh's offense a little bit. Stays in-house, goes with Sharon Moore, offensive line coach last year, co-coordinator as well last year, and then Matt Weiss, who was the quarterback's coach last year, and he's got a long history. Was with the Ravens for about a decade. Previously, the running backs coach before he came over about a year ago. So staying in-house with that hire on both accounts, having a co-coordinator situation, not really a big hire, a splash hire as well with Moore and Weiss. Not a ton of name recognition, not a ton of brand recognition there. Wasn't like you were bringing the splashy guy like Gaddis, who was in Alabama, was the receivers coach down there. They're having a great offense. You want to steal a piece of that. And Josh Gaddis came in and tried to renovate it and do so within the structure and framework of what Jim Harbaugh wanted to do, which is run the ball, more tight ends, get back to what he was doing at Stanford. It'll be interesting trying to find out, can Moore and Weiss, can they continue to evolve that? What are they ultimately going to do with McCarthy and McNamara? They have some answers and some questions that they're going to have to answer that aren't going to be easy as they try to turn this over. And now they have the big expectations of success that they hadn't had in years past. So monitoring that as we move forward, it's going to be critical if you're a Wolverines fan. Super Bowl Sunday on the horizon. Coming up, Rams, Bengals. Start about 4, lines move 3.5 to the Rams. As they're laying a little over a field goal. I like Cincinnati to win this game. It's going to be tight. I think it'll be close. And I think it'll look like a lot of Super Bowls have, where tight in the first half. No one wants to lose the game by making a mistake, putting themselves in a bad situation. So I don't know if they'll fully open it up. You don't want to have those jitters, and ultimately that costs you. So find the flow of the game first. Opens up a little more in the second half, like Cincinnati 27-24. Gosh, I think it's going to be a really great one, though. I think it's going to be a really great game and fantastic. But I talked about, like I said, my first key, watching Cincinnati's defensive backs against the wide receivers for the Rams. The second one is something everybody's going to be talking about. I got a couple numbers here I pulled out of this year. The Cincinnati offensive line. At the tackles, Isaiah Prince, Jonah Williams. Inside, Spain, Hopkins, Carmen. Trying to block, 3 dudes up front that can flat get after it. Aaron Donald, Leonard Floyd, and then the addition of Von Miller. So how do I see this thing shaking out? What are some key numbers? Well, you look at the sacks this year for those guys. Aaron Donald, phenomenal, 12.5. Leonard Floyd, 9.5. Von Miller, 5. Played pretty darn well. They can all get after it. You look in the playoffs, Von Miller's had 2. I believe a strip sack in there with one of them. Leonard Floyd's had a sack. Aaron Donald's had a sack and a half. So they've been productive in the playoffs as well. It's not like this was all regular season production. Cincinnati, what's the story for their offensive line? Joe Burrow was sacked 51 times this season. I understand it was 17 games. It's a lot. That is a lot during the regular season. You look at the postseason. Las Vegas Raiders opening round, wild card, only 2 sacks. Then Tennessee got after him for 9, and there was a handful of others that had penalties and some stuff associated with it, or it could have been 11, potentially 12. Not a great situation. Then they got the ship righted. Kansas City only gave up one sack, and the Bengals actually out-sacked the Chiefs with Mahomes running around. Sam Hubbard having a couple in the critical closing minutes of the game. So as I looked at this, and went through, Cincinnati, when they've given up 5 sacks or more, 1-4. Not a great situation. Not a great situation at all. They found a way when they give up sacks, it's too hard for that offense to overcome when they're giving up that many. Now, Tennessee was an outlier because their offense wasn't great. King Henry didn't really go off. Derrick Henry didn't have the big day they wanted. They were able to run the ball okay, but not fantastic. Ryan Tannehill turned the ball over 3 times. So that 9 sack number didn't hurt Cincinnati the way that it could have. They're playing an offense of the Rams now. They can run the football with Akers. He should be feeling pretty good and ready to go. They've got some weapons on the outside. Cincinnati's going to be able, I think, to slow them down for the most part. They're going to be able to stop them. Cooper Kupp's going to have his catches. He's going to have a score. Odell Beckham Jr., these guys are going to be able to have some success. Higbee, assuming he gets back, if he's ultimately healthy, you're not going to be able to hold down Matthew Stafford. So they're going to score points. So the number that I would say is 3.5. Cincinnati gives up less than 3.5 sacks. So 3 or less. I think they win this game. I think they ultimately will. Get the screen game involved, get the ball out of Joe Burrow's hand quickly. He knows he can't hold on to it, and the Bengals line played better against Kansas City. You get over into that 4 sack and up, it's going to be tough playing behind the chains against a defensive line that's this good when you have to score points and you're not going to be able to just line up and run the ball. They got Mixon going in that second half. They got him going in overtime in that final drive. It's going to be critical to do that to keep him off balance. But that sack number, 3.5. Remember that. Cincinnati, 1-4, 5 sacks or more. Not great. Not great. So 3.5 against the team with a high-powered offense. So hopefully the Cincinnati offensive line will hold up. I think Aaron Donald's going to get some. Von Miller, he's going to step up and make a play. But if they can keep it, like I said, 3 or less, don't get in a situation where you're staring at a 2nd and 17, a 3rd and 14, stay ahead of the chains. That will be the key for Cincinnati, that 3.5 sack number. Keep an eye on it, lock it in, because that's going to be a difference in the game. You'll be one of the smartest guys in the room sitting here watching with your friends. That's all for this edition of Carp's Corner. You got a post-Super Bowl edition that I'm sure everyone's going to want to lock in on, find out my thoughts and everything that went in there. We'll continue to break down these coaching hirings, where some of these teams are going, any of the news in college football, any pending Olympic news for the next couple of weeks, as well as I always enjoy some international stuff. But all that will always be right here on Carp's Corner.